Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the opportunity to be heard, and I would argue that the amendment before this good bill is germane because the bill essentially requires the Department of Health to provide written information and to the programs and policies that are now in place from COVID-19 and allowing the legislature and the public to receive that information. So the presentation of and sharing of information is so critical to all of us doing our job. And there's nothing more important than to reestablish our role and responsibility in that regard and to have that information to make those type of decisions. So I believe that the amendment is germane based upon that. And while we've seen the governor on TV regularly, in fact, his performances have earned him an Emmy, in contrast, conversations with legislators and with local officials are rare. And perhaps that could earn him a Razzie, because that type of communication and collaboration in developing policy is essential as we all serve the people of the state of New York. So, Mr. President, I hope maybe you will become enlightened from our points today and that you will surprise me with a ruling of germaneness on this subject, because I know I once stood where you are now and actually crafted the very language that we use in discussing the procedures of the House. But this bill is not only germane, but it speaks to the very process. And I know from conversations with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle here that there is a consensus, an appreciation, and an understanding that we have to reassert ourselves in the governance process. Sharing of information is essential, and that's what this bill does, and that's why this amendment continues to be relevant. I think all of us could understand and appreciate, as a former executive, that initially in a time of crisis, there is need for quick and prudent action when you face something such as the virus that was so uncertain and there was so much unknown. And it was a public health emergency. But I think we have transitioned now from that essential emergency to an ongoing public health crisis. And as a result of that, there is a role and responsibility for the various branches of this government to function in order to serve the people as best we can. And I know, again, from talking to my colleagues informally in conversations, that there is a willingness and an appreciation and actually a consensus that we need to do this. And as a result, we need to rein in what was once extraordinary powers granted now to allow us to function the way we should and could. It's been over a year, and I know that, as I said, speaking to members in this chamber, that there is a recognition and an acknowledgement that we're a co-equal branch of government, and that's the significance of the amendment, and as well as the bill in chief, providing information so that we can make informed decisions. There's never been a greater need, in my opinion, Mr. President, for checks and balances in our state government. Just take a look at the reports that we are receiving from independent elected officials that cite some of the problems and failed policies that have had an adverse impact upon the people of this state. Our Constitution establishes 3 co-equal branches of government. And it is imperative that we respect that separation of powers and that we ensure that we are undertaking our responsibility and undertaking our role as legislators. When that information is provided and given, then we should be an equal partner in making determinations and decisions as to what has to be done and should be done in the best interest of the people of this state. So this amendment is germane, Mr. President, because we have seen stonewalling by this executive. We have seen an unwillingness and a reluctance by the executive to provide the very information that this bill is now requiring that they do, that they give us that information so that we can undertake our role and responsibility. And I don't think it's to anybody's surprise when you see media accounts or the independent accounts of the Attorney General of the state of New York and others now that are showcasing that when you amass this type of power and it is granted and it is unchecked, it brings us into a dangerous situation relative to the enactment of policy when we must and should respect the very structure of our government. So I think that this amendment, again, by providing this amendment, by reining in the powers, will allow us to ensure that if the bill in chief is passed, and I believe it should be, that that information that is given to us will allow us to have a role in determining and changing some of the failed policies that are now in place, that are not working, despite our suggestions and recommendations. There is a reluctance on the part of the governor and the administration to take these things into consideration and to make it work. The only time we found out about some of these things was through a private meeting that was held. And that's shameful, in my opinion. And fortunately, some of that came out so people did get information, as this bill is purporting and wanting us to have that type of information so that we can gauge what's working or not working and have a role based upon our responsibility entrusted in all of us by the Constitution of this state. This shouldn't be about political survival. This should be about survival of the people that we all serve and represent. So I'm hopeful, Mr. President, that you'll reconsider, because this is the 17th time that this amendment has been brought forward. And we're saying the same things over and over because this is above politics. It's about policy. It's about what is best for all of the people we represent. We want to do our jobs on both sides of the aisle here. And it's important that we owe to the millions of people and to the thousands of grieving families that we do something, that we reassert ourselves in this process. I've always tried to be an advocate for reform. I believe in it. I mean, I truly believe in the balance of power, and I know that my colleagues here do likewise. We may lament court cases where they've given prior additional powers to the executive. We continue to chide that and to confront that, but we should not cede additional authority to the executive on a voluntary basis. And that starts with reclaiming ourselves by exercising a vote on this particular amendment, on the core subject that I believe there's consensus on, that we take this type of action, that we return government to the way it was originally structured and intended to function. When people ask now, well, if you get this information, what are you going to do with it? We're going to run the government the way it has run before. As I said, we have transitioned from an immediate emergency to a crisis, and it's still difficult and challenging, and we need to undertake that responsibility seriously. But I think we are all capable of working together collectively. Again, returning, when people say, how would you do it? Do it the way the Constitution structured it. We're structured in a certain way, and it's intended to function that way, and we can serve the people accordingly. So, Mr. President, I know that I think we need to regain this power. I know there are some of my colleagues that have actually discussed the outright stripping of that power. So let's take a stand for these rulings, Mr. President, based upon the subject matter. I urge you to reconsider and that you allow a vote on this amendment, which I know will receive support, and it is imperative that we again reassert ourselves as a co-equal, separate branch of the government serving the people of the state of New York. We're capable of doing that. Thank you, Mr. President.